Well, thank you for inviting me to your session. I think there's quite a few familiar faces in the audience. There were some of you I spoke to at the chemical industry dinner last week, and those I didn't meet there, I've probably met on Teesside. I've done a couple of visits to CPI in any event. So I think you're reasonably familiar with me, and I am reasonably familiar with you. So I don't need to rehearse all the great things you've done in the 10 years. I think just a couple of facts that I'm sure you've repeated through in the day that you've been supporting, I think something like 2,000 companies, and you've got 350 R&D collaborative projects, and some would argue that you are the foundation stone of the catapult system, certainly a key part of it. I regard the catapult program, the innovation program, as an absolutely key achievement that we've been able to carry through. The origins of this were, I think, on my very first day in the office, I got a text from a journalist, and I got 150 meetings and numerous messages. Anyway, I just happened to notice this text saying, whatever else you do in your 5 years or whatever you're going to spend in government, make sure that you follow through on the Hem and Hauser report on innovation and innovation centres. And I duly read it and was impressed by it, and we've done it. It's happened, and we've now got these innovation centres, 7 of them plus 2 currently waiting to be announced, and within that the advanced manufacturing catapult, which, since 7 is a magic number, has 7 subdivisions, of which CPI is one. And I think it's everybody who deals with it, whether they're at the science end of the spectrum or the business end of the spectrum, regards it as a great success. And, as I say, you're very much part of it and help to develop the key ideas behind it. And it's not static, because the work you're now doing developing the Biologics Centre at Darlington, and the work that's been done, I think there's a separate £19 million programme on graphene applications, which you've, I think, been instrumental in. So, this is a very big and important story. The way I see it is part of a bigger picture in which we are trying to breathe life into British manufacturing. We got to, I think, a sort of rather unfortunate state of mind in the UK, where people became very fatalistic and said, oh, well, we don't make things anymore, we should, depend for our livelihood on the City of London and banking and all that stuff, and, well, the horrendous consequences. And in any event, it was not just a parodied but fundamentally incorrect view about what was going on, because 10% of our economy, even at the height of the crisis, was going to manufacturing, much of it very high quality. It's about the same share of the economy as in France or the United States. We had and have a superb manufacturing sector, certainly at the top technology end of it. It is the core of our manufacturing exports. Our exports, the core of it is manufacturing. It's about half visible exports. It's where most of the R&D in the economy takes place, and therefore the productivity growth, which is what you need for rising living standards, and it employs an awful lot of people. I think your sector, if you combine chemicals and pharmaceuticals, and I know there's a lot of boundary issues, but certainly on a narrow definition about 160,000 people, and on a wider definition over 300,000. So, and manufacturing, of course, multiplied that by several times. So, that's why I think this is important. The way that I've approached this in government, and I think we've now got a very high level of buy-in from business and across the political parties, is through what I call an industrial strategy, and 2 very, very simple ideas at the heart of that. One of which is that government and business need to work on a partnership basis. There were slightly caricatured ideas in the past. One is that the government should control and direct everything, which is history. We're not in that anymore. But there was an equally fallacious view that government can simply stand back and laissez-faire rules. Well, actually, that was equally foolish, because there are lots of market failures. If you do that, you underinvest in science and innovation, you underinvest in training. These things don't just happen spontaneously through the market, so you have to have a collaborative approach. And the other key element in the thought process is long-term thinking. Unfortunately, for far too long, big business decisions have been driven through the markets onto a very short-term time perspective. I regarded that when I first came into politics as utterly alien. I'd come out of a big international oil and gas company where we used to do 20-year planning. The company I was in had been around for over 100 years. It couldn't be taken over because of the complexities of Dutch as well as British corporate law. So it was able to plan and think decades ahead, and that's how a lot of business has to be. Whether you're in oil and gas or dealing with aircraft or the next generation of vehicles or key developments in the IT sector, you've got to have that long-term perspective, and we lacked it. And the purpose of the industrial strategy is to try to bring together some of the core sectors of the economy, mainly manufacturing, but not exclusively so. We have service sectors like creative industries, professional services, the universities seen as an export industry, but most of the sector groups are manufacturing, and the key amongst them is the Chemical Growth Partnership. And the Chemical Growth Partnership has ambitious growth undertakings, and I hope through its work we'll be able to deliver on some of the areas that can only be done collaboratively, as with skills development and in the work on innovation. Now, in terms of where we go from here, through the industrial strategy, I think there are several building blocks we're trying to put in place. First of all, we're trying to make sure that we're able to meet manpower requirements. Britain in general is chronically short of key people at technician level or graduate and postgraduate level. I think a lot of we're doing a lot to remedy that, but it's still very serious, and so we've got to have planning through the industry, and I think we're beginning to do that. Through the trailblazer schemes for apprenticeships and some of the work with STEM subjects in schools to make sure we're getting a pipeline of people. Growing numbers are coming out of universities. One of the missing links is postgraduate funding, and we're going to try and address that. So there are key issues around skills and people. There's key issues around business finance. We can do all the fancy research we like, but if the spin-offs can't raise finance to commercialise them, we're not developing the value added in this country. And we recognise that there has long been a very serious problem in the UK with the so-called Valley of Death, the lack of access to venture capital of a kind that doesn't just lose the entrepreneurs control of their own company. I was staggered to discover when I got into my job that I'm the country's biggest venture capitalist by quite a long way. The government has a very modest programme, but it's bigger than was coming through the private sector, because British venture capital was effectively killed off in the dot-com boom and didn't come back. It is now coming back, and the business bank, which we've established, is now providing new flows of funding, mainly loan through new platforms like peer-to-peer lending, but also equity. I'm hoping that in the near future we'll be able to expand the range of the equity providing arm of the business bank, which will be quite important for startups. And then the other key element in the industrial strategy is this link between science and innovation. I know it's a bit of a platitude, but it needs repeating that, Britain has long been, world number one or number two in terms of basic science. We've got endless numbers of Nobel Prize winners, and the work in some of our universities is world leading, not just world class, but that there's been a gap between conveying that science into commercialization. And so we've had to have the right innovation strategy to turn that round. And I think the work of the catapults and that sort of basic model is key to making it work. And Hermann Hauser, who in many ways was the kind of originator, at least intellectually, of this idea, has just reported on the model, basically endorsed it, argues that we continue to roll it out, and I'm hoping we'll get cross-party backing for that, whoever wins the next election, because I think an absolute key to what we're achieving is getting buy-in. there's absolutely no point my making a splash and starting new initiatives if they're not followed through. And I think one of the most encouraging developments I've been involved in the last few months was a gathering which was not reported, but which is organised by the CPI to talk about the industrial strategy. And I made my pitch. The Conservative Minister of State in my department repeated it and said, you know, we're like this, we're going to committed to continuing it. And the Labour spokesman, Shukra Amuna, came along and said the same thing. So I think that is in itself a real achievement. Probably that's more important in many ways than the specific things we've done, the fact that we've now launched something that has long-term life. So I'll just leave you with that thought. I think the key argument that we now need to have to keep making, because there is still a certain amount of scepticism in certain quarters about this, is that, you know, government support for innovation is crucial. It doesn't displace private money, it complements it. It crowds private funding in, it doesn't crowd it out, and you'd be surprised the kind of arguments you still get amongst economists on this subject. And that although I think we're now doing great things, and we've got a lot to be proud of, we still lag behind many other countries in terms of the commitment that we make to R&D, to innovation in particular. Countries like Germany, Korea, you know, that are really very switched on the manufacturing sector are doing more than we do. So that simply sitting on what we've done so far isn't good enough. It's a platform and we've got to build up on it. Thank you.